Thank you for joining me today. My name is Kristi Jacobsen. I've worked as an ESE behavior support paraprofessional for the past 13 years. And earlier this year, I started my blog, RainMomm, as a way to share my experiences with others on this journey we call autism. I'm also the mother of 3, and my 27-year-old son, Jonathan, and I have been navigating on our own journey with autism over the past 24 years. It is my hope that by sharing my experiences over the years, you will find some information and support helpful for you and your loved one as you navigate your own journey with autism. So let's get started. My journey started with Jonathan's official diagnosis at the age of 3.5. But however many of you know, most of us are well aware that we are about to start this journey long before that diagnosis. As a baby, Jonathan was bright, happy, engaging, and hit all of his developmental milestones until we reached the age of 2, and there was a sudden shift. The language he had been acquiring appeared to slow. He seemed to lose interest in some of his toys and the activities he had done with his sister in particular. And he also seemed to isolate himself more than usual. So when we went for his 2-year pediatric visit, I expressed my concern to his pediatrician. He assured me by saying, boys typically develop slower than girls, and he has a very verbal older sister. I really don't think there's anything to worry about. I left that visit with mixed emotions. I was relieved, but there was a part of me in my gut that doubted his words. I still felt there was something going on, but he was a doctor, so I took him at his word. The months progressed, and Jonathan began to decline further. The language he had was gone. He was no longer using words to communicate with us anymore. He would point or gesture for the things he wanted. And when we couldn't understand what he was asking for, he would become upset and he would tantrum. He started lining up his cars, flipping lights on and off. He became very fixated on parts of videos. And I knew I needed help. So I started searching for some answers. And when I would research, what I found more often than not was autism. And I knew we needed help. My pediatrician had retired, so I had found a new one, and I scheduled a visit with him and brought Jonathan with me. He was almost 3 at the time, and I expressed my concerns and told him what I was fearing. He did a physical assessment of Jonathan, and after he completed that, he asked if he could do an assessment there in the exam room, which I agreed to. He had Jonathan perform some very basic tasks, and my heart sank. He couldn't perform one of the things he was being asked to do. And so I immediately blurted out, "You think he has autism too, right?" He was a little startled by my response, but he did tell me that he felt there were some areas of concern, but he wanted to do some further testing to rule out any other medical issues. So we did. When those came back negative, he referred me to the child psychiatrist at Omaha Children's Hospital. Prior to our visit with her, I, like many parents, filled out a dossier of information from birth to his age at that point in time, his developmental milestones, my pregnancy, interactions at home. When she went through all of that information, she called and scheduled an appointment to see Jonathan. We arrived, and there was a therapist there who greeted Jonathan and then ushered him into what looked like a large playroom. The doctor and I stood on the other side as there was a 2-way window, and I observed as the therapist began to assess Jonathan. Task after task, he couldn't complete. He reached the point where he became very frustrated. He started throwing blocks, screaming, and I looked over at that doctor, and the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. She was about to give me a diagnosis of autism. So when we were ushered back into her office, I really wasn't surprised. I was expecting it. Jonathan has autism, she said, PDD and OS. What I wasn't expecting were the words that followed. She looked at me and she said, "If you want to have any kind of life at all, I would get on with it now and put Jonathan in an institution. After all, you do have 2 other children to consider." After the initial shock of her statement wore off, my gut and my heart told me there had to be more possibilities for Jonathan. And so I went off navigating my own path. And I started with the internet. This was in 1998. So the internet was about 70 million users. And while there were resources and information available, not to the multitude that it is today. Most of the information regarding autism was very limited. In fact, when I would mention autism to people, more often than not, the response I would get would be, oh, like RainMomm. It was the most prominent figure with autism awareness at that time. And that was one persona, a savant. And I don't know if you've heard the quote from Dr. Stephen Shore, but it is one I believe wholeheartedly in. And his quote is just this: if you have met one person with autism, you have met one person with autism. No truer words have ever been said. Each of our loved ones is unique as the spectrum is broad. So most of the research pointed to early intervention. And we all know that's a big key to success in helping our loved ones with autism. But it's not the only piece. I also took issue with some of the information I was reading. They emphasized early intervention almost to the extreme, like a frantic pace, almost like if you didn't achieve certain things between the ages of 2 and 7, your child was not going to progress. I don't know about you. I didn't stop learning at 7 or 8. We all go on to school, college, we get degrees. We learn every single day. At my age, at 61, I'm still learning. Jonathan at 27 is still learning and acquiring new skills. So while early intervention is a very important piece, I want to put that fear to rest. Your child will always learn. So our earliest intervention came through the Omaha Public School District and their early childhood program. He had a great teacher and a great paraprofessional. And due to Jonathan's limited language, they started him with PECS, the Picture Exchange Communication Program. And boy, did Jonathan take to it. One afternoon when I went to go pick him up, his teacher called me aside and she had been videotaping that day. She shared with me a video of Jonathan. He was sitting at his table and his paraprofessional asked him what he wanted to drink. He reached over, pulled the juice pack off and handed it to her. She poured his juice. She put it back on his board. He pulled it back off and handed it to her again. She was confused and she looked at the teacher and said, I gave him juice. And you could hear her in the background say, but you didn't fill it to the top. And sure enough, when she did, Jonathan put the pack back on the board. He had just found his voice. So they also then began with something called discrete trial training, otherwise known as ABA. I knew very little about it at the time. His teacher was very impressed with how quickly Jonathan was learning, but she was also very frustrated. She only had about 10 to 12 minutes a day to work with him, as she was in a class with 12 other children, all with significant needs of their own. And she knew that if Jonathan had a more intensive program, he could make some real progress. Unfortunately, as I started to research, such a program didn't exist where we lived in Omaha, Nebraska. And as I continued to research, I found that most of those programs were located on either the East Coast or the West Coast. And we were located in the Midwest. But I continued to investigate. What I found was the Wisconsin Early Autism Project. They're in the Midwest. I contacted them, asked them about their program, and they sent me information. After my husband and I looked at it, we thought it was a very good plan, but it meant two things. I would need to move from my home, and my husband would have to stay behind. It was a sacrifice, but it was one we were willing to make. So excitedly, I contacted them to schedule an appointment. I was defeated once again when I found out there was a long wait list. But like any good mother, I called every week to find out if there was a cancellation. And one week I got a phone call. Could you be here in 3 days? We booked the flight and Jonathan and I flew to Wisconsin. There was an initial hour intake to assess him, and they felt that he was a viable candidate, but they wanted to do a 3-hour evaluation to make sure. The next day we attended the evaluation. I sat in that waiting room. It was the longest 3 hours of my life. But when they emerged with Jonathan, the examiner looked at me and said, welcome to Wisconsin Early Autism Project. And we were about to navigate a whole new journey. We moved 2 weeks later, and within the 4 months prior to the start of the program, they were assembling Jonathan's team. We started at the end of January in 2000, and we were very blessed to have a very supportive and dedicating group of therapists with us, carrying on this journey. And I'll be very honest with you, it felt kind of nice to hand the wheel over to somebody else, to let them drive so I could sit back and journey with Jonathan. So they started his program and Jonathan took to it. In fact, one afternoon, his therapist came up to me after they had completed a session, and I asked her how things were going. She said Jonathan was doing very well. He had struggled a little bit with the program that they had just worked on, but she had every confidence that he would master it quickly. He was doing really well. She left. I went on to fix dinner. Jonathan was watching TV. I came out of the kitchen about 15 minutes later, and he wasn't there. I was a little concerned. He wasn't all over back then. I went to his bedroom. He was not there. Now I'm starting to panic. I run downstairs, and there he is, sitting at his therapy table. In front of him, the file folder he had struggled with an hour before. As I walked up to him, he lifted his head and looked at me and gave me the biggest grin. And I looked down. He'd gotten it right, just perfectly. He got up. He put the file folder away. He went back upstairs and continued to watch TV. And I stood there and realized several things. Jonathan had just taken the wheel and navigated for himself when no one was looking. He was determined, he was smart, he was dedicated, and he was ready to navigate right along with me. So I was feeling very confident in the base that we were getting with our ABA program and the foundation that it was going to give Jonathan. But I also knew that I wanted more for him. And so we talked about other ways to round out his programming. We added some other aspects to ABA from Carbone. We used Greenspan floor time, and then I wanted more. So we incorporated play skills, leisure skills, peer play, life skills, community outings, just to name a few. If Jonathan expressed an interest or a need, we adapted our program accordingly. There were life lessons that would support him for the rest of his life. Because remember, they start out as children, but our children become adolescents and then become adults. So as we are maneuvering and navigating, we need to always keep that in mind. One such program was Jonathan's food therapy program. He was a very, very picky eater. And I, like many people, had tried the gluten-free, casein-free diet. Unfortunately, we did not find the same success. So we initiated a food therapy program. It was 2 years, slow, steady, and painstakingly. But at the end of those 2 years, Jonathan, instead of eating 5 or 6 foods, ate virtually everything you would put in front of him. A healthy, well-rounded diet, with the exception of pickles. He still doesn't like them. We also went on to do a pill swallowing program. At one point, he had strep throat, and they gave him amoxicillin. It was a pill. He didn't know how to swallow. We had to go back and get a suspension. Another life skill. That one took longer, 4 years. But guess what? Eventually, he got it. And I will tell you this. I say it often, but I think it's really important. When you are navigating this journey, remember, if one thing worked, we would all be doing the exact same thing. And that's not the case. You are on this journey with your child and your loved one. You know them, and you can support their needs and their progress. And yes, we may travel similar paths, but your path and your journey will not be exactly the same as someone else's. So remember that as you navigate forward. So now with his home program in full swing, I realized we would soon be reaching another navigational strategy, elementary school. However, before that, I wanted to make sure Jonathan was potty trained. So I went to my team once again, and we put together a potty training program. It was hit or miss. We modeled, we had a social story, we did reinforcers, common language. Sometimes he got it, sometimes he didn't. I never considered that Jonathan would navigate when he felt the time was right, and it was actually at a time when I least expected it. It happened one Saturday morning. We had dutifully set the oven timer. We would set it every 15 minutes to take him to the bathroom. And a friend of mine called. She too had a son with autism, and they were in crisis and needed my help. So I grabbed my daughter, threw a pair of shorts on Jonathan, and off to her house we went. When I arrived, I helped her and her son through the crisis. And then I went into the living room where I had left Jonathan and Cassandra. She was there, he was not. Mild panic again. But sure enough, I heard a noise and looked up, And there in her hallway was her bathroom door, wide open. And there was Jonathan, going to the bathroom like he'd done it his whole life. He went up her, pulled up his pants, flushed the toilet, went to the sink, washed his hands, dried them, walked back in, and sat down like he'd been doing it his whole life. He looked at my friend and I, who were basically standing there with our mouths dropped open. When Jonathan was ready, he knew what to do. So now, with potty training accomplished, we set our sights on elementary school. I'll be honest with you, I was very nervous about this transition. We had a great home program. I knew my therapist. It was comfortable. And now we were going to go out of my comfort zone, and Jonathan's as well. I met with his teachers, his kindergarten teacher and his special ed teacher, and they were both kind and incredibly supportive. And I will never forget the words that his special ed teacher said to me. She looked me in the eye and she said, "I am not an autism expert, and I don't know everything there is to know about autism, but I will do everything I can to help your son be successful." It was like music to my ears. Someone willing to collaborate on this piece of our journey. So, true to her word, she came to our home over the summer and she watched Jonathan at his home program. With that, she invited my senior therapist to come to school, to look at the classroom, to go through the structure, the routines, what Jonathan would be experiencing when he went. And I must say, they both came up with a great idea. They formed a mock school in our basement so that Jonathan could practice over the summer. His first day of school, I was so nervous. And then the call came from his teacher. And I asked, how did his day go? And her words were, like a duck to water. Jonathan had just navigated his first day of kindergarten all on his own. It's a really important reminder about this piece is that there is no I in team. And I will say that many, many times. What I have learned as I've navigated this journey is it is a very collaborative process. There are many people who will work with your child and work with you. We all need to work together because ultimately it is for the success of our loved one. And collaboration is a powerful, powerful tool. So, what does all this mean for you as you're navigating your journey with autism? What tools do you need and can you take away from this? Well, first and foremost, the two most important tools on your journey are you and your loved one with autism. Trust each other. You know your loved one better than anyone, and your importance and your significance moving forward will be what propels them to their success. And you're going to wear many, many hats. Parent, caregiver, teacher, therapist, advocate, researcher. The list goes on and on. Go with your gut, go with your heart, and love. Your commitment and your dedication, along with your instincts and your love, will guide you even through the most trying of times. Listen to your child. Let them show you who they are, just like Jonathan showed me. Let them show you what they can do, what they want, what they like, what they need. What they reveal will lead you to the tools that you need to navigate your journey. And more importantly, remember, this journey is not about perfection. It's about possibilities and progress. And remember, our loved ones are as unique as the spectrum is broad. The second tool would be resources, and there are lots of them. I'm here with you today because of Autism Connect, an organization with tremendous outreach, resources, forums, potential for you to find what you need. Use the internet to your advantage. I will warn you now, it can be very overwhelming. And I always tell people to look at it this way. It's like when you go to a restaurant and you have a menu. Do you order everything off the menu? No. Pick what you need. You can always go back to it. Whatever you need will be there. Another important tool, stay connected. And by that, I'm talking about, in particular, other parents. I can tell you right now, other parents have been a tremendous amount of support for me, especially helping me fast track things, like obtaining waiver services for Jonathan or finding local community supports. And this autism community is a big one. And there are many, many people out there who want to welcome you and help you in any way they can, myself included. Reach out to us. We are here to help you. And two other important tools, as I just alluded to, collaboration and also communication. There are going to be so many people in your life on this journey, navigating right along with you. Those two pieces are key for your success, your loved one's success, and determining how you navigate. I have found more information from people I never even anticipated. From Jonathan's school receptionist, to one of his custodians, to my therapist, to my teachers, everyone. I also think it's important to communicate things like if your child's having an off day. Sometimes Jonathan wouldn't sleep very well, and I would be sure and say, just so you know, Jonathan hasn't slept very well. And I collaborated through every step of the way. Elementary school, middle school, high school, vocational, job coaches, day training. You learn so much, and it really helps alleviate some of the roadblocks or detours that can get thrown in your path while you're navigating. And lastly, the community supports. Based on whatever community you're in, there are often local supports, parent groups, day centers, recreational facilities. Look for those, reach out, and find what fits the needs of your loved one. And lastly, I know this may not be considered a resource, but I will tell you right now, it's a very important tool. It's called self-care. I know you're shaking your head going, who has time for self-care? You must. I will tell you right now, my idea of self-care in the early days used to be getting in a shower, or if I was really lucky, going to the store by myself. That's barely survival. You cannot navigate on an empty tank or a flat tire, and you are the vehicle of progress with your loved one. So you have to make sure you're taking care of you. And there are ways to self-care. Utilize those. Ask for help. Receive help when it's offered. I know it's hard. We think we need to do this all ourselves, but let others help you along the way. Pursue your own interests and hobbies outside of autism. Sometimes we get consumed, and it can be overwhelming. Try to remember, you are an individual for autism, and you are still an individual with the journey. You need time for yourself. And that self-care is not selfish. It is survival, and it is what makes you a better caregiver. And that's what you need to be in order to care for your loved one. In closing, I would like to thank Autism Connect for the opportunity to be here with you today. And also to thank them for the tremendous support they have shown my blog, RainMomm, in helping me reach others as they navigate the journey. I remind you, I'm here for you. You can reach out on my blog or on my Facebook group of the same name, RainMomm. And if there's any way I can help or any information or support I can give, I will happily do that. I would like to leave you with one last thought. Remember, as you navigate this journey, there is no perfect path, but there are paths filled with possibilities, promise, and progress. Go find yours. Thank you.